In session.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Okay. Okay, now then we're going to.
Okay. Do you need to adjourn until we?
Do we need to adjourn now?
No, you can recess until 7 or till
Okay.
6 unless you want to start right
Hi,
away.
Terry. How are you?
If Mr. Brez is ready to start right away, he can.
Pardon me?
If Mr. Brez is ready to start right away, he can.
Hey, it's two Johns, no waiting.
I'll get it going.
Hey, is there any way we could have a tabletop to write on? Would you like a tabletop? It's fine.
You can have that tape.
What?
Just pull it up,
Are
dude.
you gonna put them on screen?
No.
Okay.
You? What were you asking, Mr. Hancock?
If we could use a tabletop to write on,
Sure.
over here?
Yeah, I think it's
I
okay.
think just use John and Jennifer's seats for,
Yeah.
for the purpose of the
Yeah.
work session.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to just sit there?
Yeah, let's.
Yeah. I'll start it. I'd like to call to order a work session discussing the topic of Better Together. This was something that was brought to me by Joe Brazel. I really don't have that big an interest in it since I only lived in St. Louis County for a minuscule part of my life. But in concession of Mr. Brazel, I brought this to the floor so we could have a discussion. So, Mr. Brazel, take it over. This was supposed to be a debate. I'd like it to actually be a debate, not a one-sided discussion, and I'd like to try to control it so it is something like that.
Okay, thank you, John, Mr. Chairman. Guys, as you know, we had a resolution presented, I don't know, 6 weeks ago. Mr. Hancock had asked if we waited to the end of this month to have a discussion on it. And John Lampin is an ex-senator from the Chesterfield area, and him and I, he actually moved out to St. Charles County, and so he's one ridge over from me. We don't say one street over, we say one ridge over now in the country. So he's my neighbor, and we've been discussing this. And so we put this resolution on the floor. And so what we'll do is, I did talk to these gentlemen on how this agenda is set up. And so if you see the agenda, you guys were all given the agenda. The other gentlemen are on this side over here are also people who have an interest in this and why we should support the resolution. And we have time. We will try to honor the time on each topic. On the 5 minutes, what we'd like to do from the council, since this is a work session, you are able to ask questions, but let them finish their time and then ask them questions. So that way we can make sure that they get their time fulfilled. So what we'll do is we'll start with Mr. Lamping on the discussion of the resolution, and the topic would be why is this going to a statewide vote, and as the resolution states, it is unconstitutional and disenfranchises the voters.
Where would you have me stand?
You can use
Right
the
there.
podium.
Yeah.
I've got some supporting documents. Well, very good. Thank you, gentlemen, this evening for giving me this time. My name is John Lamping. I live at 107 Nam Road in Augusta. And I come to you today as a concerned citizen in support of St. Charles County Council's Substitute Resolution 1901. As you're aware, in January this year, Better Together, a privately funded organization, filed with the Secretary of State's office an initiative petition to change the Missouri Constitution to merge the city and the county. As a constitutional amendment change is only required to pass with a simple statewide majority. In the Missouri Constitution today, Article 6, Section 30A, there exists the constitutional remedy to bring the city and the county together. This is commonly referred to as a freeholder process. This constitutional remedy allows the citizens of St. Louis City and County to vote exclusively on a merger proposal. Better Together has suggested that a statewide vote, due to the fact that a statewide vote is required, due to the fact that certain aspects of the proposal could not be implemented through the freeholder process. Things such as combining municipal courts or the police force, I would agree with them. Their proposal is unconstitutional and does require a statewide constitutional amendment vote. What they have refused to acknowledge in their proposal is that their proposal could easily include a requirement that the proposal pass at the local level as well, specifically at the local level. This fact has not been lost in the General Assembly. Currently, House Joint Resolution 54 has passed out of the General Laws Committee. It too is a constitutional ballot proposal that would create the requirement that any proposal to change a new form of government require passage of local voters and for those who will live under the newly formed government. So this is House Joint Resolution 54, and it says that a new form of government or territory located in existing county shall not become effective except by a vote of a majority of the qualified voters in the county. If this gets to the ballot, I have no doubt that an overwhelming majority of St. Charles County voters will vote for their right of self-determination. In my opinion, Better Together is nothing more than a political operation. Formed in 2013, it employs numerous political consultants of both parties, as well as a complete lobbying crew. They recently announced a $25 million campaign to see this proposal through at the statewide level. It's no surprise for me to tell you today that their lobbyists are in Jeff City working diligently to see that House Joint Resolution number 54 never come to a vote in Jefferson City, nor anywhere in the state of Missouri anytime. I would suggest that Better Together's merger proposal will completely transform St. Louis City and County. It voids both the city and the county charters. It allows for the creation of a new charter to be written after the proposal has been voted on in 2021. All this will occur without a local public vote. In fact, the public never gets to vote exclusively on the form of government they will be asked to live under. It isn't until November of 2022 that the local community will vote for the first time, but then it's only for the representatives, not for the form of government nor the charter. It will already have been adopted. So why support Senate Resolution 1901, your resolution? It's non-binding. What good will it do? Well, you could ask the same question in the Missouri State Senate. On this past Holy Thursday, the Senate passed Senate Concurrent Resolution number 1, a non-binding resolution by a vote of 26-5. They wanted to be heard on the issue, and they wanted their opinion to be made clear. I would call your attention to the second and third paragraph of the Senate Concurrent Resolution. Whereas some Missourians may seek a statewide vote on a constitutional amendment to bypass the voters of St. Louis City and County, a statewide vote of such an important matter of local government structure would set a precedent. It would set a precedent that could lead to subsequent statewide votes, mandating the consolidation of counties, school districts, and other political subdivisions throughout Missouri against the wishes of the voters in those political subdivisions. If BT's merger proposal is successful and avoids seeking approval and specific consent of those 1.3 million people who will live under this new form of county government, it will become the precedent for future county mergers. Many of the proponents of this plan look to St. Charles, and when they do, they often ask many questions. Why don't people in St. Charles pay the zoo tax? Why don't they pay the arch tax? Why don't they pay to expand Metrolink? Unfortunately, Missouri is but one of a handful of states that requires a simple majority to pass an initiative petition, just a few, to change the Constitution. As long as that be the case, it is only money that prevents private organizations such as Better Together from changing the Constitution, creating new forms of government without explicit consent of those who will live under those forms of government. I would ask each of you to be our voice in St. Charles County, to make your position clear and support the right of the residents of the city and St. Louis County to self-determination without the intrusion of non-residents and subjection to a statewide referendum. This current process cannot become the precedent.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Lampin. Does anybody have any questions for him? He will come back a second time as well. Okay, Mr. Hancock.
Evening, everyone. Remember, this is a debate about whether a statewide vote on reform is appropriate. It's not a debate about the merits of the underlying proposal. I'd like to take just a moment to address a couple of the issues raised. Senator mentioned the freeholder process. That has been tried 3 times, in the 1920s, the 1950s, and the 1980s, and it has failed. St. Louis has been unable to reform itself every time it is tried. And this does, in fact, require a statewide constitutional amendment to make the changes possible. You cannot liquidate the city of St. Louis, as this does, without a constitutional amendment. You cannot consolidate municipal courts and police departments, as this does, without a constitutional amendment. So there will be a constitutional amendment, and it is appropriate for the voters of the state to act on that. 2, to the local vote, I'm going to deal with that below, whether or not the local vote should govern in a matter such as this. The only other thing he mentioned that I'd like to respond to is the idea that this is precedent setting. I would argue that it is not precedent setting because we're creating a new class of metro city that doesn't exist anywhere else in statute. The whole point of creating something different is so that it can't be used to extrapolate and be imposed on other places in the state. If you believe the governing structure in St. Louis today is sound and operating properly, then you should vote for this resolution because there's no need to change it. I believe St. Louis must change, and I believe this proposal offers us a path forward. And I'd like to offer practical reasons and principled reasons to oppose the resolution. 1, state taxpayers have an interest in St. Louis health and safety. The crime issue affects everyone. It affects your constituents. Economic impacts. The success of St. Louis and what happens economically affects your constituents in the entire state. Massive amounts of state funds are taken from St. Charles and sent to St. Louis, whether it be for stadiums or schools or voluntary transfer programs or infrastructure or convention and tourism. That affects your voters. Also, if St. Louis defaults, that affects your voters. All state taxpayers will have to bail out the city of St. Louis. 2 elected officials opposing this proposal have already written and said that a default in St. Louis is superior to the reform proposal offered in the reunification. I contend to you that default is not good for your voters, and they should have a voice, a unique voice, in expressing their feelings on this issue. Number 2, St. Charles County voters have a particular interest in the health and safety in St. Louis. The proximity means you use the facilities in St. Louis on a regular basis. B, your taxpayers are St. Louis taxpayers. Many of them pay sales tax in St. Louis. Many of them pay earnings tax in St. Louis. St. Charles County, of all places, should want to have a voice in what happens in St. Louis. C, if St. Louis recesses, it will directly impact the growth and success of St. Charles County. You should want to see St. Louis become economically vibrant and succeed. And then D, apply the bailout argument. Your voters should have a voice so that they don't get forced to bail out St. Louis. Argument 2, principled reasons to oppose the resolution. A, you state in the resolution the government closest to the people serves the people best. That's paraphrasing Jefferson. I would submit to you, 1, that Jefferson comment, it says states are better than the national government. He was talking specifically about state governments. Little 2, states are actually sovereign. Sovereign states came together to form this country. The U.S. Constitution doesn't mention counties, doesn't mention municipalities. Sovereign states formed this country, and states are sovereign. Little 3, states determine county boundaries and set limits on power throughout the state. Your boundaries are set by the state. Your limitations are set by the state. I would contend that little 4, the state of Missouri has already established the boundaries for all the counties in the state, and this is precisely that. Little 5, the state constitution has defined the duties, requirements, and limitations. If it's appropriate for the state of Missouri, through its amendment of its constitution, to define boundaries and set structures for governments, then I would contend that a statewide vote is precisely appropriate in this matter. Finally, you say that local government is the foundation of democracy. That's what your resolution states. I would contend that 1, government, any government, is not the foundation of anything. Little 2, in our system, we, the people, are the foundation of democracy. We're unique in this respect, and I would vote against this resolution simply on that basis. Little 3, government is the creation of people. Local governments are the creation of a sovereign state government. That's the way our system works. and little d, little 4, if this resolution fails principally in this regard, finally, he got 30 seconds, you're setting a dangerous precedent. If you're going to give local control over the boundaries of a county, you have no principal reason to oppose local control for them to set their own gun laws and regulation of abortion clinics and minimum wage rates. Principally, you cannot say a local vote is allowed here, but not in other places. Thank you.
Hold on, Mr. Hancock. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Hancock? I have a couple, John. You had mentioned, you said St. Louis. We all know that St. Louis has issues. We all know St. Louis. You didn't mention one time the municipality. So you're focused on strictly the city of St. Louis. Is that correct?
No, I think St. Louis is dysfunctional throughout.
So St. Louis County, the concern that I would have with what some of your statements are, there are some cities in St. Louis County that gives it the special successes.
Yes, and if you love those municipalities so much, why are you only giving the city and the county the ability to opt out of this thing? If you love the municipality so much, if Florissant votes against it, then it ought to be null and void. But no, you're saying the city and county ought to be able to nullify it, but not the municipalities.
So by disenfranchising, what you're doing you know that the vote, if this was a good plan for the city of St. Louis, and I'm talking about the vote, okay? Well, if it was a good plan that was that city, county voters and city voters would think it was a good plan, then why would you have to reach far beyond someone in Poplar Bluff or Cape Girardeau or
I would contend that
Sykeston?
St. Louis has tried 3 different times to change the dysfunctional system of government they have locally, and it has failed 3 times.
Any questions?
I do.
Yeah, Joe.
Here's the fear, okay? It's not right to have voters in other parts of the state decide an issue it's important to St. Louis City, St. Louis County. And the fear is that Mr. Sinkfeld, who's bankrolling this thing, will spend his gazillion dollars all over the state in rural areas. People don't know any damn thing about it, but people will get influence enough to vote for it, okay? It's not right. It's just not right. Those folks, you know, if St. Louis County wants and St. Louis City want to merge, those people should be making that decision, not voters in St. Charles County, okay? No different than if Mr. Nations wants to bring Chesterfield into St. Louis and St. Charles County. I'd say if it's okay with the voters of St. Charles County, it's okay with the voters of Chesterfield. Why not? Should somebody in Jefferson City should be deciding between if that Chesterfield comes in? No, they shouldn't. So this whole thing's stinko, and I'm from the country. You can put lipstick on a pig; it's still a pig, and that's what I think you do.
This is just a debate. Let's not get into that.
All right, hold on a second. All right, no, Joe's entitled to this is a work session. This is not a. So, are you done with your questions? Yep. John, any other questions for Mr. Hancock? All right, John Lampin, you want to respond to that? You got is it 4? What's the time? 5 minutes on this?
And John, if you want to jump in too, we can debate. And
No, go ahead.
So, to that point, and to John's point before about not setting a precedent, because what is it that this is a new metro city. Look, they're completely redoing Missouri's Constitution. The Constitution has a remedy. It's the freeholder remedy. The 1980s were a long time ago. Who knows if it gets through there or not? And this is a new precedent, and there's nothing to keep a well-funded political group from starting again from scratch all over again in the next election cycle and say, we're going to have a 5th class of county. And we're going to, and St. Charles and Franklin County are so close to each other, and there's so much inefficiency, and we're going to merge them together. This is one, in my opinion, it's one man's political concept, and there are a lot of political actors involved. You're concentrating power in a very narrow group of people, power that now is pretty well dispersed throughout the county. But again, getting back to this resolution is where your citizens are on this issue. If St. Charles County was at risk of being forced into a merger with St. Louis County, Franklin County, any other counties, if they were going to be forced into that merger without them themselves voting on the merger, without they themselves voting on the charter under which they would, the charter is like the Constitution for a county. It describes how strong or weak is the executive. What's your role as legislators? You know, is there a filibuster? How does the whole process work? I mean, tonight in St. Louis County Chambers, they're deciding on the new county executive, who in its original form was going to be designated as the first four-year mayor of the Metro City, and it's their charter which determines the process. This charter has not been inked. It doesn't exist. The public never votes on the charter. So look, I'm from St. Charles County. Joe's my council member. We all know that people in St. Charles County aren't completely aware of what's going on. You need to play a leadership role. The Missouri Senate stood up on the floor on Holy Thursday and said, this is wrong. This needs to be a local issue, and I'm here in support of your resolution. I hope all of you support the resolution. I'm quite certain that your citizens here in St. Charles County feel the same.
Any questions for Mr. Lamping? Thank you,
Thank
John.
you.
Mr. Hancock?
Thank you. Thanks, John. To the point that somebody's going to come along and try and merge St. Charles and Franklin County, it's just not the case. St. Louis was unified initially. This is redoing the way things were at one time in St. Louis. Nobody is interested in merging a bunch of counties across the state. Many people believe that St. Louis is structurally broken. Many of your constituents believe that St. Louis is structurally broken. Many of your constituents have to get multiple business licenses to do business in St. Louis. Many of your constituents get pulled over by a dozen different municipalities and pay traffic fines in those municipalities. It's broken, and this is a proposal to fix it. I'm not going to debate the merits of that proposal. You can decide that proposal stinks, and that is well your prerogative. I do not think, however, that you should vote tonight on a resolution that would disenfranchise your voters from having a voice in what happens in a region that is crucial to their livelihoods and way of life. I would not vote for a resolution that quotes Jefferson saying government closest to the people serves people best, when Jefferson was talking about states, and this is precisely a state initiative. I would not vote for a resolution tonight that says local government is the foundation of democracy. We the people are the foundation of democracy. Local governments are created by states. Counties are created by states. County boundaries are created by states. I would argue it's entirely appropriate for the state of Missouri and its constitution to govern how boundaries are established in St. Louis. I would not vote for a resolution tonight that says the right to vote on matters affecting purely local interests, free from outside interference and oppression, is fundamental to citizens. Why? Because this proposal affects the people of St. Charles County. They work in St. Louis, many do. They pay taxes in St. Louis, many do. I would argue your county, more than just about any other, has a vested interest in what happens in St. Louis. And if you abrogate your ability to amend the state constitution and let somebody opt out, I would say you're disenfranchising your voters. Finally, if the principle that local control should govern this and that St. Louis should be able to opt out, then I would say the mayor of Chesterfield and the mayor of Florissant and their people ought to be able to opt out too. Why just the city? Why just the county? If you're going to apply that principle, you're not applying it precisely. And I think that's a flaw with the state legislative proposal as well. Lastly, this resolution, it's non-binding, but you're saying some things in there and talking about the foundation of the country. And I would submit to you that I would think long and hard before I would vote to ratify something that's going to deny my people their right for a say-so. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Mr. Hancock? Yes, David.
St. Louis has this a special situation that it doesn't exist anywhere in any other cities in this state. Are there other cities like this in the country that have a similar situation?
The ones that have been like this have decided to unify. All of the reform all over the country is moving towards some model of what's being proposed here for St. Louis. Whether you look at Indianapolis or Louisville or Nashville or Jacksonville, no one is deciding to separate themselves today the way St. Louis is separated. That's not happening anywhere in the country. Why? Because it doesn't work. The economics don't work. The business climate doesn't work. the sales tax allocation doesn't work. It's a broken system in St. Louis. And it's a broken system that's been recognized as such for 100 years by the people of St. Louis, and they have been unable to solve that conundrum to date.
And I would suggest to you that those unifications that occurred around the country took place with a local vote.
Not entirely true. Indianapolis was done by the state legislature, imposing its will on the county of Marion.
Anyway, okay. Any other?
I'd like to ask Mr. Lamping, where is the state legislature in this argument? I know we have two statements here, but they certainly have the ability to pass. I mean, they have the ability, though, to pass.
Right.
Hey, John, there's another mic here if you want to stand.
Yeah, to pass
You
it.
guys can stand next to each other.
Oh, yeah.
They have the ability to handle this
Right.
problem themselves without getting us, St. Louis County, St. Louis City, I mean, involved in a vote. Am I correct?
Well, you're voting on a non-binding resolution.
Right.
The Senate has voted on a non-binding resolution, far more explicit than yours.
Okay,
I have provided a copy.
right.
The HJR 54 that I referenced is passed out of committee in the House, but is being heavily lobbied against. Better Together has a very strong lobbying core, and as you may know, in the state of Missouri, it's very difficult to get anything passed with a very strong filibuster. And even though I would like to say I'm optimistic that that resolution is going to pass, it's probably stuck in that committee.
Well, you know what, again, I'm not talking about the resolution. I'm talking about an actual,
That is the solution. That would allow for a constitutional amendment vote to occur at the same time that this proposal will be on, that would amend the Constitution, that before, in this example, counties could merge, the local voters would have to approve that
Local
merger.
counties.
The local counties would have to approve the merging of those counties. So that sits in the Speaker's office, and it's probably not going to get to a floor vote. There's a lot of opportunities to suggest that money has tremendous influence in politics. We saw a certain amount of evidence of that today in St. Louis County. I would suggest that there's a lot of influence being wielded down in Jefferson City these last 2 weeks of session.
I think you guys might do well to have a resolution that opposes the plan. I mean, just in terms of representing your people, I think that's a cleaner, more direct way of going about this, because this resolution says, however we vote in St. Charles doesn't matter. And so, I mean, if you want to pass a statement on this issue, I would urge you to consider opposing the plan. I think it's cleaner, I think it's more consistent, and I think more defensible.
I like that idea. I think we should do both.
I do too, but can you guys set, are we done with their questions? Because we had 3 other guests that are part of the agenda.
And I got an Ernie Special waiting for me.
Well, you can't leave yet, we're not done. No, we're going to take this out.
If we're missing the Blues game, you're missing the Blues game.
Can we,
That's how it's gonna work.
we'd have finish this thing. We got 3 other guests that were part of the agenda, and then we can ask them questions, and we can always go back to you guys. We're not done with you guys yet, so, because you got to counter what some of these guys are.
I really don't have any interest in countering what they said.
I have one
but I do
question
an
for
interest in
him.
my Ernie Special.
Well, it's part of the whole deal. They're St. Louis County cities, so I mean, as if you know, you're interested in this.
I
Huh?
mean, if the gentleman doesn't want to participate, don't force him to.
It's non-binding, so you're free to leave.
your invitation was
Can we have one
non-binding.
question?
Yes.
Okay. When you say oppose the plan, okay? Yes, I think it's fair to state what you said, that people in St. Charles County are affected by St. Louis City. My grandfather and godfather, St. Louis City policeman. I have a son who lives in Central West End. So yeah, I care about St. Louis, but I don't think it's going to hell. Okay. In fact, my son argues with me that all the time with all the new buildings going on in downtown, all the new things are going on. Okay. Do they have problems? Yeah, they got problems. This is really drastic though, because one thing that we haven't brought up is you're cutting the property tax in half. You're getting rid of the earnings tax. Where are you going to pay for cops when you in road projects and all that stuff when that happens? And the thing that's really stinky about it, in my opinion, at least, is the same guy that's pushing this wants to sell the airport. And I go to the airport a lot, and it's always getting improved. That lady that runs that airport is doing a fantastic job. So, I mean, Mr. Sinkfeld spent $800,000 a month on that airport. trying to privatize that airport. Why don't he spend $800,000 a month helping us police officers in St. Louis get computers at work and stuff like that? I think there's a lot that can be done with that money besides that. And if you want to get rid of all the little towns that have speed traps, there's a real simple way of doing it. Have this area pass a law that all the police departments in those small municipalities have to meet CLIA standards, like our county does, okay? And then you get those police departments, they either merge like North County did, or they go away, okay? There's other ways to fix it than this.
Yeah, no, if you think St. Louis is structurally sound, then there's no need to change anything. I mean, that's true.
Well, I think there's need for change, but not by cutting the revenue in half.
Well, I mean, I just, if you're going to leave, John, the only, I mean, I got a lot of comments, but I'd just like to say, it seems to me the only people who are supporting this Better Together in its form going to a statewide vote are the ones who are either ex-politicians or politicians or consultants who receive some kind of funding from the gentleman he's talking about. So I don't know of a whole lot of people who are else in favor of it. And it's quite the obvious ploy that this is being reached out to this whole state just to dilute the voters in St. Louis County and St. Louis City. And I do think St. Louis is dysfunctional. I get it, but the cities aren't. There's a lot of great cities in St. Louis County.
You know, I would not support something for money that I fundamentally disagreed with. I would not. If they were going to put the city of St. Louis as it exists as a municipality into the county, I would not support that. Okay? I am being paid for my effort. But I'm working on it because I support it. I don't work for things that I don't believe in. I believe in this. So I want to make that very clear.
That's fair enough, but the perception is that a lot of the folks, you know.
Mr. Hancock, we appreciate you coming and giving your position on this. It certainly gives us something to think about. You brought up some very good points. I think that St. Charles County our fate is tied to what goes on in St. Louis County and St. Louis City. The question that I'm still wrestling with is the further you get away from St. Louis, the less and less impact it has. And still a vote in St. Joe, Missouri is going to count as much for or against the merger as someone that lives and breathes it and tastes it every single day. And that's the problem that I'm still wrestling with myself.
St. Joseph people built that stadium.
Yep.
Down there. They participate in St. Louis.
Yep.
Mr. Schneider, you want to come up for your...
Thank you, John.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, well, he's still in earshot. You know, it's telling that, you know, John's leaving. He doesn't want to hear what I have to say. Neither did Rex Singfeld, neither did Cruson, neither did Stinger.
Well, we're willing.
It's very telling. I'm a Citizen Schneider for 1 week now, former mayor of the city of Florissant. In 1967, I was in college at Rolla. I felt like I belonged someplace else. I felt the call to duty because my generation was at war, and I was a child of the greatest generation. I read about the 25th anniversary of the Navy Seabees, so I joined there, and by joining the Seabees, I got lucky. I got to go to Vietnam twice instead of just once, and I also went to Gitmo. After the Navy, I did get that degree in civil engineering. I was hired by the legendary Mayor James Egan as the city engineer. I also filled in as street superintendent, public works director. Egan gave me this pin. This tie has the city colors, the fleur-de-lis. The colors represent green for fertile land, white for a clean and healthy city, and gold for the value of elected government, which I think Better Together is trying to do away with. I felt another call to duty in a 6-man race for city council. I won 10 more times. In 11, I felt another higher calling. I found myself in another 6-person race. So I won twice as mayor. I'm 13-0. I'm retired as undefeated and on my own terms as one of the longest continuing serving elected officials in Missouri with 40 years of service. I bring this up because despite my resume, I was never called or consulted by anyone associated with Rex Singfeld or Better Together. I was in the same room with Stenger and Cruson several times and never asked for me for my input into developing a plan for improved regional governance. I was the mayor of the oldest and largest city in the county, but was not consulted, and neither was any other municipal official that I know of, and we're talking about centuries of knowledge. Like St. Charles City, Florissant has been sovereign and is older than the county, older than Missouri, and 2 years older than the Constitution of the United States. Worse yet, available experts from academia in the field of governance, several of which are based in our county, and are members of a very small group of experts nationally. UMSL Professor Terry Jones and Mark Trammell and Webster Professor Jim Bransfield are experts in demography and have written volumes about the problems with the Better Together plan. You know, I ran into John Hancock in an airport in D.C. I asked him if he thought that a plan that gave St. Louis City and County 23% of the vote and 100% of the consequences on a plan developed by a panel of people not from our region was fair and American. It's my hope that a person who has been given the integrity of a major political party will excuse himself, but I guess after tonight, that hope is drowned, and not suffer the same consequences that former NAACP President Gaskins and former county executive has. This process, there's a process in place, and the St. Louis County Municipal League is trying to put a board of freeholders together. And that board of freeholders worked once when they formed MSD. That board of freeholders will be transparent. That board of freeholders will get input from the citizens that is eventually going to make that decision, and then they'll put something before the voters. That process is messy, but it's been messy in this country from the beginning, and I prefer that to having some central committee from Beijing tell me, try to shove something down my throat. And I think that people like Rex Sinquefield are a danger to our republic. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, next we have the speaker pro.
Well, there's, Mr. Hancock was sent this agenda, and apparently there's nobody that's, that he brought with him to speak against the resolution.
So I don't want to turn this in just to a, one-sided, it's not a debate if it's just one-sided.
Well, I sent him the agenda. What am I supposed to do, bring his witnesses?
Is there anybody else who wants to speak on the other side?
Well, we have an agenda here. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Schneider? So, Tom, they didn't come to you one time and ask you any questions on this Better Together?
No one.
No one
No
did?
one. No.
And so your city's been positive, cash flow, everything's been good for 200-plus years, and so
230 years.
It would just dilute.
Yeah, it would turn us into a park department.
Yeah.
We've been one of the first cities in Missouri to get CALEA accreditation. We've had people involved in the major K squad the whole time we founded it. Mary Lowry founded it. We have our roots are so deep. We've got people that have been living in Florissant for 6 generations. Matter of fact, on the Vietnam Memorial, we have a guy named DeLasis, and his great-great-great-grandfather, or 4 greats in there, was the last Spanish-French governor of the Louisiana Territory. And now you're just make us a park department. It's cruel and unusual, and it's ridiculous, really.
Thank you, sir. We have Bob Nation, or no, I'm sorry, who's on the agenda next?
Mayor Pagano.
Mayor Pagano?
Mayor Pagano.
Tom has almost half as much time in government as Mayor Pagano.
Good
Sorry,
evening,
Lynn.
everyone. I understand what you're saying, making it a one-sided, but if there was other interested individuals, they should have been here this evening. I have to agree with Mr. Lamping's words there, and I want everyone to understand the Senate, that was both parties, that 25 of them had voted against that, the Constitution. Am I correct, sir?
Well, they voted 26-5
20.
to ask for it to be a local decision.
Right. I just, and speaking of residency, I lived on the Hill. I lived in North City and North County, and now I'm out here since '76. Matter of fact, I was down on the Hill in a parade down there last year, and it felt good, you know, and the people there are very proud of their community, very strong-natured individuals. And I have no doubt in my mind that whole area down there would be against this. On the other thing, the word that was used here more than once, it's appropriate to have a constitutional change. No, gentlemen, absolutely not. That word was used very strong by the one individual. There's nothing appropriate about dealing with our Constitution. There's, because this is a very serious offense, and I do believe it will affect our county. Maybe not my lifetime, but it may be our children's lifetime. That's all I have, sir. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Pagano, Mayor Pagano? No? No? Is there no speakers that are opposed to the resolution? Mayor Nation?
Thank you very much. My name is Bob Nation. I live at 17669 Bridgeway Drive, Chesterfield, Missouri. I happen to be the mayor of the city of Chesterfield. County Executive Elman, St. Charles County Council members, thank you for the opportunity to be here and address this very important issue this evening. Specifically the resolution of the substitute resolution 19-01. I'm going to go ahead, and if you bear with me, I'm going to read this because I'm not that adept at public speaking as is Mayor Pagano and my predecessor, Mayor Snyder. It cannot be restated enough that to allow a statewide vote on an amendment that would completely alter our form and structure of government within St. Louis City and St. Louis County is completely un-American and undemocratic. This is contrary to the principle. And I just happened to Google this last night. What principles of government? So they talked about this Thomas Jefferson thing that Mr. Hancock tried to refute, and he's not here to refute this. So the second most important concept or principle of government is consent of the people who are governed. So to allow a statewide ballot on this Better Together plan it violates completely that principle. Rest assured that St. Charles County could be next to be consumed by the mega government, and with fewer voters to overcome in St. Charles County, it could be an easier task. Please know that I'm not suggesting this except for the purpose of illustrating how wrong the statewide vote on Better Together proposal is. Would the St. Charles County taxpayers like to have the opportunity of paying the cost of a Metrolink expansion or share in the cost of the Zoo Museum expenses, and then have that put on a statewide ballot? I think the answer is obviously no. I'm going to restate a few of the phrases from the Chesterfield resolution, and it gives us some insight as to the factual concepts contained in the petition of the Better Together plan, which has many inconsistencies with the, I call it the propaganda plan. The aforesaid initiative petition contains multiple provisions which are offensive to the city of Chesterfield, its residents, and the businesses which operate within the city. The petition was conceived, developed, and written in secret without the participation of those directly affected by an unelected and unaccountable non-governmental organization promoting their agenda while the citizens of the city of St. Louis and St. Louis County were not afforded the protection of the Missouri Sunshine Law, which ensures governmental transparency, openness, and accountability. A statewide ballot dilutes the votes from within the city of St. Louis and St. Louis County and demonstrates contempt for the citizens of the city of St. Louis and St. Louis County by denying them the sole right to determine their future and form of governance. The petition causes the destruction of local governance for which the majority of citizens in St. Louis County voted, enacted, and have enjoyed for many decades. The petition causes the elimination of the internationally accredited Chesterfield Police Department and all other municipal police departments in every city in St. Louis County. The petition eliminates the Chesterfield Municipal Court and every other municipal court in St. Louis County, and the petition eliminates the St. Louis County Council and the St. Louis Board of Aldermen. In closing, I urge your support of Substitute Resolution 19-01. And thank you for your time.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Mayor Nation?
I do.
I do too, but go ahead, John, you go ahead.
Why do you think we even need this resolution? We made this public now, and why do you think this council should vote on it and vote for it?
Because, first of all, we're all neighbors. We're engaged in public service to try to deliver the best governance for our constituents, whether it be in the city, municipalities, or county, and which side of the river, it doesn't matter. The plan itself, as Mr. Hancock mentioned, you said you ought to suggest we ought to pass a resolution against it. I wholeheartedly agree. I've read the plan, and the plan is horrendous. And to impose the government and the conditions and the terms that would be imposed on the population of 1.3 million is just horrendous. So it's a common sense thing when you have a billionaire who's pledged to spend tens of millions of dollars to get this passed one way or another. And oh, by the way, it is absolutely horrendous to look up on the MEC website and see who all has taken money from Rex Sinquefield or one of his entities. And I'm talking about local senators, I'm talking about Speaker of the House, former speakers of the House. It's really repulsive. So,
Terry?
Yes, I totally agree with a lot of the things you're saying. We have two mayors of two very successful cities in St. Louis County, without question. Florissant and Chesterfield, very, very successful.
Thank you.
I think most of the people that I've talked to in St. Charles, they disagree with almost everything. I mean, they agree with almost everything you've said. But at the end of the conversation, and I just want your opinion, they all look at me and they go, something needs to be done, though.
Well, and that
would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, and I'd say, 6-8 months ago, I might not have so readily agreed with it. But I mean, that the only avenue that has been identified is the rational course of action of the Board of Freeholder, the Board of Electors. So, I think Mr. Sinquefield would be better spent putting his money behind as good a process that can be achieved with the Board of Freeholders.
Thank you.
So Bob, is it true what you said? I didn't know this, that they had all these meetings and this was not transparent. They did not have.
No, I believe these meetings that they talk about, all these de pair, and they call them town hall meetings, or what do they call? They're not true input. They're different. They're not input meetings seeking true public input like we are accustomed to in real government. They are not a government. And we've sought out, we've tried through our city administrator, we've made repeated attempts to try to contact these people, and they won't talk to you, just like Mr. Hancock left here. Oh, by the way, there's a state statute that says a state, in the case of an insolvent city, i.e. perhaps the city of St. Louis, if it's insolvent, it is not the responsibility of the state to take on that debt. So, but he tried to mislead us all here. This, I tell you what, I could talk for a long time, but obviously we don't have the time, but I'll just say this. I believe this from the bottom of my heart. This plan that I have read that's on file with the Secretary of State is deceitful, it's disingenuous, it's dishonest, and it's nothing but an absolute big ruse. And we need to do anything and everything that we can to fight it. It's kind of like a David and Goliath when you have a billionaire and other influential, successful people within our region who seemingly are behind it. Maybe some of them have good intentions, maybe some of them are misguided, maybe some of them have conflicts of interest. I don't know. But we need to do, and that's why I'm here asking you all for your support in passing this resolution.
Any other questions from Mayor Nation? John, do you got anything you want to add in closing?
Yeah, what I just might say here at the end is, maybe we're all in agreement that St. Louis County needs to do better. And who knows, maybe today is certainly was an historic day. You had a sitting county executive indicted. Charges are for corruption to the highest degree. He resigns. As we speak, a new county executive is being installed, or will shortly thereafter be installed. How do we fix St. Louis County? Well, maybe it's from the top, from leadership, from competent leadership that's not corrupt. And I think today could be that historic day. I think what you voted on this resolution would just make this most historic day that much more complete. But I think that's how St. Louis gets fixed. It gets fixed with local leadership, strong leadership, and I think that's how the problems get solved. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you all for coming. What the way the meeting will go is we got about 5 minutes before our 7 o'clock actual meeting, and the resolution is one of the first items on the agenda. There will be public comment. If you want to, anybody is welcome. We'll have 3 in favor and 3 opposed that come up and make another comment if you like that, and then we will vote on this resolution prior to that, those public comments. So that's how that will work. So if you want to hang out, that's great, because we should be resolved with the resolution item like 10 minutes after.
If you do come up for public comments, you need to fill out a speaker card.
Yeah, fill out a speaker card now if you like, if you're interested, and we appreciate you guys for coming. I think this is a very important issue. I think this is very important to St. Charles County. We are neighbors, and it is our, St. Louis County is our region. We're all in this together, so.
But since it is a topic, it will be, it'll be alternate between 1 for and 1 against, a pro and con, which is all speakers on one side.
I think that may be tough to do in this crowd. I'm just guessing.
But then
You can't manufacture opposition.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I suggest we take a short recess before our regular.
All right.
I'll
Mr.
second
Chairman.
that.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, County Executive?
Before we go, can I make just one comment?
Yes.
I just want to go on record agreeing with Mr. Cronin. I'm not opposed to Chesterfield deciding on their own to come into St. Charles County. But I would be opposed to Defiance determining on their own to go into St. Louis County, or Augusta going into Franklin County. I just want to make that clear.
Just so as be said, I had a lot of calls with Mr. Nation and even Ellisville and Wildwood, and we've had a lot of conversation like that. However, that would have to be determined.
Yeah. Can I respond to County Executive?
There was a motion to go into.
Oh, never mind.
There's a gravel road between my farm and Franklin County. You gotta fix it.
I would like to congratulate. I would like to congratulate Councilman Sam Page, who's the new acting county executive in St. Louis County. So.
Not Augusta,
All right.
Let me make one last comment, and it's not about the resolution. Mayor Schneider, Tom was an elected official for, 44 years. He was the one that talked me into being a city councilman when I was 24 years old.
So we have him to blame? We have him to blame?
Your fault. Now we know why.
Yeah.
All right, we're going
We
to
liked you until that comment.
we're going to take a recess until the council meeting at 7 o'clock.
Our clock's messed up, so you may want to.